Tonight, Mulan makes landfall in northern Vietnam. And now the latest around the wide world of tropics. Tropical Weather Bulletin for August 11th. So we have two no longer tropical cyclones or storms that are active. Howard, which has devolved very quickly into a remnant low this evening, and Mulan, which is down to tropical depression status as it makes landfall in northern Vietnam. So far, 43 storms have formed around the world. On day 72 of Atlantic hurricane season, we're still got half an eye on an area of interest that's slipped down to 10% chance now in the main development region. Chances were looking good for a while, but it's definitely slipped away and there's hardly any model support anymore. In the Eastern Pacific, Howard is dying off and two areas of interest remain active at moderate chances. 50% in the Eastern Pacific, although National Hurricane Center have it much higher, and a 40% chance south of the Hawaiian Islands, back up from earlier due to its decent appearance and the ECMWF wanting it to still form. Western Pacific, we have Mulan 90W, which we earlier designated as a tropical depression, but it now appears to have lost it again, and an area of interest that we're monitoring for next week in the Philippine Sea. In the Indian Ocean, there's no areas of interest active at this time, although there'll be another monsoonal depression by the looks of things in the northern Bay of Bengal in fairly short order, next 48 hours. Let's go then to the satellite imagery, and this is what the Atlantic is looking like so far. Once again, you can see towards the far right hand side that tropical wave that's moving along, but it's really not producing very much. Lots of cloud cover and convection over the Yucatan and over the southern United States today, so quite a lot of summer thunderstorms there. Eastern Pacific, if you look carefully, you'll see what's left of Howard. You probably won't be able to see its center of circulation though. That'll be a tough catch. And down towards the bottom right there, you can see that area of interest, which is very broad and will struggle to get itself together in the next couple of days, but it should eventually get there. Here's a close-up view of that area of interest that's approaching Japan, that we earlier designated as a tropical depression for a while, and now it's not, and it's pretty clear to see why. It's really struggling with convection too far away from the center at this point. The center is swirling there, and it does appear to be well, it's quite easily closed, but it is quite far divorced from that convection now. And here is the Mulan making landfall in Vietnam right now. Massive amounts of convection on either side of its perceived center, which is quite difficult to get a hold of, and it is looking a little bit messy and definitely monsoonal in nature. Here's a wider shot of the Western Pacific right now and the progression of the last 24 hours in the basin, where you can see both of those cyclones swirling around in their respective locations. Mulan, once again, convective clouds all the way down into the South China Sea, still affecting even the Western Philippine Islands, so an extremely broad system it has been. Indian Ocean, once again you can see the monsoonal patterns continuing there over large parts of Indian subcontinent. All around this time of year you get that kind of activity. Two massive bits of convection on either side of India though. And down in the southern hemisphere, the Australian region looking fairly quiet as you'd expect. A few frontal systems moving through, obviously non-tropical in nature. New South Wales looks like it's getting quite a bit right now, and another one just the tail end of it moving through Fiji and the Solomon Islands, delivering some convective clouds. Sea surface temperatures, as you can see, have done a number on Howard, right down to about 22 degrees Celsius, so really not conducive at all. Will we have those other chances of development? Well, there's the Atlantic one, that's at 10% and looking decent sea surface temperature wise, 28, and in the Eastern Pacific you've got 28 for the other AOI, and in the Central Pacific, I know it's not on the screen now, I think it's a fairly marginal there, it's around 26 degrees Celsius. Indian Ocean, very warm in the northern part of the Bay of Bengal. South China Sea, where Mulan is right now, temperatures are touching 30 degrees Celsius, probably more conducive just to the southwest. The rest of the South China Sea still looking decent, no real signs of upwelling, and over the Philippine Sea also. Temperatures really up to 30 degrees as far north as southern Kyushu in Japan, and a 28 degree isotherm extending onto the northern coast of Japan, halfway up Honshu even at this point, as well as the eastern Chinese coast, pretty much to the Korean peninsula. And look how above average those areas are, in particular in the Western Pacific. East Pac is half and half. The Atlantic is slightly above average, although it would appear that the Gulf is equalizing a little bit, and the tropical zone of the Atlantic is around about average. Looking at the oceanic heat content, it is the Caribbean if we're going to see any real fuel for tropical cyclones. Of course, they can take advantage of virtually any area in the usual bounds of development. Eastern Pacific there, just a few areas off the coast. Western Pacific boiling hot. The longer we go on without any significant activity here, more likely we'll see some significant typhoons fairly soon. So let's check the computer models, and right now we're looking at the Eastern Pacific. We're not going to show the Atlantic because it's really a non-event at this point. And you can see the next system forming into a tropical cyclone. I don't have it on my monitor here, but I think it becomes a weak hurricane if I remember rightly, following a similar track to Howard, and eventually dying off quite quickly, I believe it was. The track of it is just a little bit further towards the west of what we saw with Howard. Western Pacific, and it's quite annoying that I can't see it again, unfortunately, but you'll see that tropical storm moving past Japan, quite close to Tokyo. We just covered that in an update earlier today, and then shoving itself off towards the northeast, and obviously Mulan moving inland very quickly and dying off very quickly. Rainfall amounts from both systems could be quite significant though. With 90W, you could see gales of 50 knots for parts of southeastern Kyushu. And looking down towards the very deep tropics in the Western Pacific, potentially another system, signals are getting stronger for a new tropical cyclone to develop down there over the Micronesian islands. And if that does happen, that really will be one to watch for potentially becoming a significant typhoon further down the line. So all eyes on that one, I think, for some potential significant activity. So we're taking a look at precipitation forecasts for both of the current Western Pacific systems, and you can see the trails respectively going off in either direction. In China, from Mulan, we're expecting possibly 9 inches of further rainfall. In Vietnam, that's around 200 to 250 millimeters, so quite substantial. In Japan, we're also looking at similar amounts further north, even towards Hokkaido, 9 inches I think it was there as well, with lesser amounts but still quite significant possible in the more populated areas. Longer range then, this is day 5 through 10, looking at the Eastern Pacific once again. And you'll have to excuse me again because I can't see anything on the screen output. It's really annoying when that happens, but nothing can be done at my end. I believe there's another system that ends up forming behind it, and we get more hurricane activity as far as I can best recall. I think it becomes that next system becomes a substantial hurricane, or indeed the current system that's on the radar. And in the Western Pacific, this one showing what happens with that tropical cyclone becoming a substantial typhoon as it approaches the Philippines and slams into Luzon and weakens as it moves on through the South China Sea. I believe it also depicted another tropical cyclone in the Philippine Sea on this model run that you might also be able to see on here. Well then, that's all the important stuff done at this point. Let me tell you about the merch store. You can scan the barcode and it'll teleport you right there, where we offer full season and individual storm animations on request, as well as our whole range of merchandise, including the still waiting for Hone t-shirt, of which we still are waiting for that Hone. Well, entering the Scilly Range, and we can take a look once again at the Eastern Pacific and what else happens. I believe we still have a storm that moves through the Baja California Peninsula, and I think there was another one behind it. I honestly can't remember at this point. One that forms quite far towards the east, I think, towards the end of that 16-day period. It would really help if I could see any of it so I could narrate it properly for you, but sadly that's just not the case. I don't know what the issue is. But yeah, usual expectations in the Eastern Pacific. We could see 3 or 4 more storms in that 16-day period. Western Pacific, we're watching, this is quite silly in the long range period, so 3 systems there active, possibly 4, and then here comes this massive typhoon that forms over the Northern Mariana Islands and really goes for it. GFS currently suggesting a minimum pressure there of 930 millibars as it deepens and expands to massive proportions over the Northern Mariana Islands, but at the moment it is all a dream because it's the long range GFS, so go back to sleep. Well then, on August 11th 1992 there was an actual you could call it a verification of that system actually. Kent was its name, a category 4 in the Western Pacific, and it was just northeast of the Mariana Islands at this point when it was peaking. We also had Tropical Depression 12E in the Eastern Pacific. What an active season that was, to be up to 12 already at this point. Of course, this year in the Eastern Pacific we are currently on, I think it's 8 or 9, so not far behind. Eastern Pacific has been majorly overperforming this year. So let's take a look at the next names. The Danielle is next in the Atlantic. In the Eastern Pacific it will be Yvette, and in the Central Pacific we're still waiting for Hone. The Atlantic is currently at 23% of what we would expect at this point in the year. Eastern Pacific is at 150%, meaning it's overperforming, and in the Western Pacific, before Mulan, we're at around 25% of what you would normally expect by this point. This is all in terms of ACE, so it's really struggling there. Miri's the next name. In the North Indian Ocean, it's Sitrang. And in the Southern Hemisphere, the next name in Australia is Darian. The Southwest Indian Ocean will see Ashley, and the South Pacific's next name is Harley. That's all for tonight's Tropical Weather Bulletin. We'll be back again tomorrow night.